Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're going to discuss whether having AI write your docs is actually helpful.
Nice. Okay.
So, the genesis of this idea, Isaac and I were just at a developer conference in lovely Oakland, and there were many companies there pitching various AI things. And it's not a question of, well, one of the companies was pitching, hey, we're a incident service, and after the incident, we can have our AI, it'll read the discussions, and it will generate the retro and the after action, and this will be helpful and useful to everyone. And my immediate reaction was not to question whether that was possible, because it totally is, and it seemed like it did a reasonable job. But my question was, but is that actually solving, what problem does that solve? Because I know right now my problem, or my view of the problem, is when I see when we have an incident, like we discuss it and we can resolve it. The things that I hope people get out of doing the retro is, one, it will make them go back and look at it and think about it and ponder it more. The act of writing the retro will make them spend time thinking about it, the causes and everything else. It'll force that. And then the larger problem is just then nobody reads it.
Yeah.
And so if we had AI write it and then nobody reads it, have we solved anything, right? The minimal effort, the minimum value we were getting out of the retro was that somebody was spending the time to think about it and write it before it went into a black hole.
Yeah, I think I have a similar experience, and that's almost every time. Like I feel like we have pushed developers to write documentation on anything from the code that they've tinkered with to business level rationale for why they're doing it. Like imagine a product, and that you've written some code for that product, but there's a business concept behind the product, and you want to list out like different partners, onboarding types, like different kind of rationale for why you've done things the way you've done them. And generally, you're always like redirecting people to those documents, rather than like struggling to write those documents. I feel like so whenever people ask, "Oh, what does this product do?" then you're like, "Oh, well, did you look for the document? Did you look in Confluence for it, or did you check Slack or this particular channel, the public channel that we had associated with this idea?" And generally, the answer is, "Oh, I didn't realize it existed." And then you try to find your way to get to it, and then they read it.
RTFM.
Yeah, RTFM, but like if you haven't indexed if you haven't indexed it correctly, it's difficult to know that there was a manual.
Yeah, I guess it sounds like we're kind of in agreement here, where having the AI, I guess, well, maybe let's check in. Would having the AI write the documentation in your case help that? Because then, in theory, people could always assume that the document existed because it should have been trivial. Like, would that be helpful? Because you're saying, hey, if you don't know that the document exists, then certainly you aren't going to read it.
Yeah.
And so if you have AI writing all the docs for you, God, 30 years ago, I worked in high school, I worked with a guy, and he did a lot of his code. He made sure that the code was literate, self-documenting, right? So he could run a lexical scanner and it would build the docs. Java was big on that too. And so like I always knew that the docs always exist and the docs were always up to date, because every time you did a build, it would just update all the docs.
Right.
And that fallen very much by the wayside. Would having AI write all the docs, if that was a build phase in your company, hey, we're going to compile, and then the AI is going to write up the docs, revise them, and then upload the revised version. Do you think that would encourage people to actually read them?
That's a good question, because I think that if the assumption is that everything would have a document, that changes things, right? Because right now it's like, oh, we might have documented this feature. If it was part of this build phase or whatever, that's going to take everything and write documents for everything. And the assumption is now, oh, we have a process in place by which nothing would be undocumented, then that might shift the culture to go and check first for that document. But I do think that now that pretty much the major problem is not struggling to find a place to put the documentation, but constantly redirecting people to go and read that before asking me a question, because that's your time tax right there.
Yeah.
Is like people keep coming to you first and going, how does this work, or why did we build this, or who's the customer that we're building this for? And you go, oh, did you check Confluence? And they go, oh, well, I did, but I couldn't find it, or no, I didn't. And you have to keep like pushing people to do that. So even if you had stuff that generated the code part of it, that might not necessarily, that couldn't generate the customer side of it, because the AI is not going to know. It's not going to have the context of who you built it for, but it can have context of like scanning the code base and trying to come up with code documentation.
Right.
So there's still some business context that's probably valuable that it's not going to pick up on, that you still need to document.
Well, it might pick it up if you put, so if you, the developer, put the business context as a comment in the code, then it would be able to pick up on it, because you put it in the code and then it's reading the code. And
yeah,
it gets us back to literate programming, where
yeah.
you are adding tags to your code. And I've had this argument many times. No, it's discussion. Like, where do you put the business documentation for your code? If you put it in the code, that's great, because then the developers will always see it when they go to look at it, but none of the business people will see it.
I just had this discussion actually yesterday with somebody who made some documentation. He wanted to be able to search GitLab repos more easily, because for some reason, I don't know if we're just doing search wrong or something, but he and I and a few others had struggled to find all of the repos underneath our particular project in GitLab. And we have this bad shared code for one of the repos, and we wanted to see what other locations in the code base were using that function so we could safely change it. And the search was not working for us. So he wrote something that would do it better, essentially. And we got into this complaint that we had on the readmes for some files. Sometimes, instead of a readme, it would be a link to a Confluence document in the readme. And then the readme, or rather the Confluence document, would tell you how to build the project and other information around like related reasons, like what the project's for, who uses it, which teams own it, and that kind of thing. And so we had this discussion of like, the README should really just tell you how to build the thing, like how to get it spun up locally, and maybe some quick context around what it's used for, like a small summary at the top. And then all the other business logic behind it, like what customer problem it was solving, that kind of thing, doesn't necessarily need to be in the README, because your README could go on like a novel. It could be very long.
Yeah.
And so they kind of got us in a discussion around like what part should live where, and how do you get people to keep that in sync? Because we would go look at the README, and it'd be very frustrating when you've cloned a project and the README just said check Confluence. And then you have to go to Confluence, and then you look at it last updated 2019, and you're like, well, is this build even? Usually the build was out of date. Like, so this gets us back to the kind of like this problem here is like documentation in general. You can generate all you want, but you still need to find ways to kind of curate that and go. One of those companies was like, oh, look, we can see the last time this was edited and approved was this date. And that's great for us. But if you have AI generating those things and marking the last updated date, you might be under the illusion that this is correct and updated. And the AI may have done something that you didn't anticipate, or given you the false understanding that this build date was recently approved, or this build documentation was recently revised, when it was just automatically updated.
Yeah, I could see that. So we've sort of come now full circle, where we started off by saying, do you think we would, going back to the original complaint that I had of, there is value in having the developer write the documentation because it makes them think about the structure. Like, you had a stream of consciousness for like an incident, or you have documentation, like documentation where somebody looks at the code and writes it post hoc, right after the code exists. Like, this is what the code does, versus documentation where somebody writes it ahead of time, like saying this is what I'm doing, or this is what it's doing, and I find it very valuable for developers when you make them sort of have that discussion ahead of time, then write code, and they're like, okay, now does your code actually do things that you explained it? Like, oh no, it's kind of a muddled mess. Like
Yeah.
it helps developers see that. And if we go back to AI doing it all, would developers still see it the same way?
That's also kind of a good point. It reminds me of like you don't really understand it well enough unless you can teach it.
Mm-hmm.
That's like or some kind of like phrase of that is out there in the world. And so the documentation might be one of those things too, where like I know sometimes that for me, as I'm writing documentation, I'll get to one particular point and go, I can't really describe how well that works because, I guess I don't understand it very well. I didn't care about that piece
Mm-hmm.
for my delivery. I just had to deliver this part of it. But now that I'm writing documentation for others to read, it would be really helpful if I actually understood that flow. That way I can go back through and write a better flow. So you're right. It could take away one moment where an engineer could better understand the system because we're like, oh, whatever. AI will generate that for me. I don't have to understand it very well. Um, and I feel like that argument goes, it almost feels like a generational thing too. We're like, we're like wondering, like everyone's like, you're not going to have a calculator with you at all times when you're in school. And then like
Mm-hmm.
now we always have a calculator with us because we have a phone with us. And now we're like, oh, well, AI will generate that document, but it's not going to learn everything. But who knows? Maybe it gets better in 20 years.
Well, I think I'm making a slightly different argument of saying being able to write document. I'm saying if you can't write documentation about what you've done, it's probably not
Hmm.
very clear in your head, right? Like it's the difference
Yeah,
between
I agree with that.
um, I know some people who are very, very bad storytellers, and children are very bad storytellers. So you say, oh, how no, like how do you play this game? And you will proceed to get a step-by-step list of all the things you do, and when you're listening to them, you then have to build up a mental model of like, okay, they're doing all these things. What is the game? Like, what are we doing here?
I
Whereas
see.
if you talk to an adult and you try to, I'll take Uno. I've been playing a lot of Uno, right? You talk to the kids, and the kids will tell you, you have 7 cards and you play them, but you have to make sure that it's this. And you're trying to explain Uno by
Hmm.
actually walking through a round of Uno. It's hard. But if you explain
Right.
what Uno is as an adult, you have cards and you're trying to be the first one out of cards, and you have to play a card that is the same, color or number as the other person, and you know that's where I think maybe the AI thing will
Ah,
hurt us
okay.
because AI can absolutely explain the steps,
Yes. So I
right? It,
see.
it
So
can
you're
explain how a round of Uno proceeds, and I could read that, but it's not going to tell me what the point of Uno is.
right, right. So yeah, I think we're going to kind of arrive at the same conclusion there. Is it describes what exists, but not what the original goal was.
Right.
Right. It's so and it can't unless you somehow like provide that in a comment, like you're talking about, some kind of way to describe that or throw it in there, because it will never understand why you started building that code to begin with, unless you explicitly say that. It'll scan through the code base, it'll find the functions, and go, oh, given what you've built, this is actually what it's doing. But yeah, that context needs to somehow be provided to it.
Right. And I assume that will get better over time.
Yeah.
Uh, but I also wonder, like, would, or maybe it won't get better at time, because this is to me the value proposition of humans over AI. Like when they people, oh well, AI is just going to write the low level code, and humans are going to tell the prompt injection or whatever they're calling it. If you can't explain what it is you've done or what you're doing from a meta level, like, oh, a child might explain how you walk down the street to the park, but it would be very hard to get them to say, oh, I'm going to the park. They will explain the
Right.
steps to get to the park. And I feel I'm going to sound snotty, but a lot of developers have trouble explaining that as well. They can explain, oh, well, I know what I needed to do, and so I did all these steps, and I didn't document it. Now, in retrospect, I don't actually have any idea what I did or why I was doing it, but here's steps, and it gets you to the park. And I feel like a lot of developers have trouble making that movement out back, taking a step back and say, oh, well, this is what I did. Right? The
Yeah.
summarization is hard. And there's a lot of clarity when you can see it and you get into it. And so going back to the incident response thing of I can imagine AI would be very good at saying, "Oh, we made a change. We changed a setting, and it caused too many database connections, and so then people were having outages, and we fixed it by reducing the database connections."
Hmm.
Right, and AI could very easily, if that was your outage, summarize that, and everyone could agree that is indeed what happened. Right, you ran out of database connections. But to me, it's like, oh well, that the problem isn't really what happened. The problem is you have no idea how many database connections you have, and you have no monitoring on that.
Hmm.
Now you've made these changes, and so if the developer doesn't make the incident report and nobody reads the incident report, the value proposition, you're going to lose all that.
Yeah, and part of me thinks too, like whenever AI just handles stuff for you,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe this is just me. I feel like kind of I'm not as drawn to it. Like if there was a channel that always gave me auto-generated reports,
Yeah,
for
you tune
example,
it out after a minute.
you tune it out. Yeah. So even now, like if Slack is down, and well, I won't use Slack, but like AWS or some other kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing goes down, and you have a Slack channel that tells you it's like hooked up with integration to tell you something went down. After a while, that becomes noise. You're interested at first because you're like, "Ooh, was it a service I cared about?" But then after a while, it's just like, "Oh, this is going down. This is back up. This is down. This is back up."
Yeah, it's
But
noise.
if John Doe, some important person leading this thing, posts a blurb about it, then you're like, "Oh," and you're drawn to it because it's like someone went out of the way to write it, so it's probably a little more meaningful. So I think that will become a problem too, is like making sure that we don't tune out the auto-generated things or just assume, oh yeah, we have documents there. I didn't check them because AI is going to take care of that.
AI wrote the document, so I know we have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know my company we pays for CodePilot, and I was using it for a while, and then I
Hmm.
turned it off because a lot of times it would start writing document blocks for me, and they were
Yeah.
correct, but they weren't really what I was trying. Like, they didn't capture the essence of what it was, and so I'd have to read it and then think about it and then adjust it, which took significantly longer for me than just not having it and writing it myself in the first place, because I had to.
Did
Hmm?
did what it generated kind of help you reflect on what you were coding? Like maybe and how it generated what it thought you were doing. It made you kind of like step back and go, oh, maybe what I'm coding isn't clear. That even the computer is trying to give me the wrong suggestion or something like that.
It would have, but I was working in legacy code in this case,
Oh,
in these cases, and so I already knew it wasn't clear.
right, right.
And the comment that CodePilot would produce would be correct, but it wouldn't make it anything more clear. So it wasn't useful. It just added to the noise. So
Gosh. All right. Well,
I,
any final thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
no, I think we're in agreement that AI is generally a good thing.
Hmm.
It can write pretty decent docs. Probably having AI bringing AI in as part of your Autodoc process probably would be a very good thing,
Hmm.
especially if it helps you come to a conclusion on the where should your documentation live. It's one of those, well, with automation, it can just live everywhere because it doesn't cost anything to produce it. And we seem to still feel that having documentation, automating things like incident response summaries, it's
Right.
probably not there yet. And that part of that problem is that nobody reads the summaries. And so the value, if there is any, is that writing it, right? Like, writing it is still useful to the human who
Hmm.
has to do it because it makes them think.
Yeah.
And especially if no one's ever going to read it, not having the human write it just so you got your SOX compliance or something, that would be bad.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.